Hello everyone. My name is Max, and I am software engineer at Soltage. Today we are going to talk about something you have heard, about something you know, something you understand how important it could be: validations. I want you to dive into my journey, so let's rock it. First of all, take a look on this controller. A kind of it I have faced. I have simplified it in order to not make you scared, and now it is not as ugly as it could be. But just imagine the worst controller you have ever seen. We are talking about it. So the first question is what parameters I'm working with. These parameters are spread through the code. I need time to build the whole incoming object, and I may make mistakes, I may be wrong. I need to go to documentation, but I know how documentations are created. So the best option is to set a breakpoint here and take a look. Each time in every project, I see a lot of conventions about defaults. So the question is, what if parameter B doesn't come to you? You answer, okay, let me check. And the second question is from you already. Okay, mate, please specify once again, where does it come? Because you have the same default declared many times. And in the good scenario, they are the same. Validations, they're just absent. Maybe on the highest level, all the key error exceptions in this scenario are code and transformed into 500 error, but I hope no. In this scenario, we just face an internal server error, review and fix. I hope everyone has already built an API. If no, I hope everybody has already used one. And I'm sure each API contains inconsistency, even from Google. Trust me, I really faced it. We always face a kind of inconsistencies, and guys who have already built their own API know it's annoying to keep the documentation up to date with code. That's why we have inconsistencies. When I saw this code, I was pretty sure that all the data can be controlled better. Before, I have been using Python for 3 years, and there are some good data validation libraries that I have used before, and I got the answer. We have to write Ruby code that describes our data structures. We need a powerful library that will allow us to validate the data and maybe to decompose the code I used into a meta structure for documentation generation. I have started the research and faced such gems as JSON schema gem, which had ugly JavaScript syntax, and I really don't like it. R schema, which has a mix of JSON schema and functional programming that is inconsistent, and Ruby developers don't use it. Dry validation, and I really like this approach. I have started to use it. I liked it, but soon I found that I didn't have a lot of features I need, and it's very difficult to extend. And after that, I have faced Parametric gem with 30 likes, the tiniest gem, which was very lightweight and easy to understand. And here we go. I want to present you the rules for schema definition in Parametric gem. Parametric allows you declaring that data schemas that are built using fields. Each field has rules and can contain other fields inside. The concept is simple. Declare schema once, reuse it as many times as you want. So first of all, you have to define the field, which is an alternative to the key of a hash. after that, you can define the validation rules that can be applied to the key value pair. So it describes a validation rule for the whole item of a hash or other complex object. So here you can say that, okay, field title, so I expect a key title, and the value for this key should be a string, and both key and value should be present in this object, which may come. For field text, which is expected to be key text, I expect value to be an array, and it doesn't matter for me whether it's present or not, so it's just a kind of optional field. For field status, I expect that the value should be one of given options, draft or published, and if nothing comes, I expect to set default, which is draft. So parametric gem uses whitelisting approach. So you have to whitelist each field which should come. And if an undeclared key comes, it will be ignored. And if an expected field which should be present doesn't come to schema validation, the result object will contain error about it. Take a look on this Rails controller. I wrote it just for presentation. This is how I think your controller looks like. I think this is a good controller enough. It's clean, has data validations, and can be considered safe. Now, I want you to see how all the data manipulations and validations can be moved out from the controller. The first is common used method validate params, a kind of it. You expect some keys as arguments and expect that action parameters method, object contains all the given keys. So if some key is absent, you raise an error. This is really common scenario for Rails project. This behavior can be moved into just two lines of code. You say that field session secrets should be present. The same for field redirect URL. Here we can see that many of parameters are optional, and if they don't come, we will set a default value for them. And this is how Parametric allows you to set default values. Also, here we handle behavior for options. So you expect that field status can be one of defined statuses and nothing else. And even more, the custom validation method, which is validate active session, which expects that session should be found, should not be expired, should not be failed, and should not be closed. Otherwise, it raises error, can be handled via policy. We will talk about it later. Here is how does the schema for previous controller action looks like. The custom validation is moved to a validation class named policy, which is going to be described in the next slide. But now just take a look on how do controller look now when all the data manipulation is delegated to gem. This is how controller was looking before in the left side. And in the right side, you see the validation class, which is above, and the controller that now includes only its own responsibility. Despite the fact that lines of code were reduced, the new approach performs much more actions and validations, and it is safe. I have told about policies. We have used a format policy which declares pattern for a string, but URL is a common behavior and can be reused, and we are free to save the URL validation logic into a class named policy. A policy should respond to the following methods: coerce, valid, message, metadata, and eligible. All of them are defined in the parent class and can be safely overwritten if needed. Valid method returns true or false whether validation passed successfully or not. Coerce allows you to transform your value into the one coerce method returns. Eligible method says whether to call validation or not. Message method is invoked when validation fails, and it is the one message you see in the validation result class. Metadata method allows you to pass custom metadata and reach it later. Here, I override methods valid, coerce, and message, and now I can use my valid URL policy in order to validate whether a string is a valid URL and transform it into URI object. So, parametric gem is a declarative, explicit, and whitelisted schemas for data structures. It allows you to reuse the validation logic that significantly reduces code duplication. You should forget about ActionController parameters. That is absolutely weird thing. I don't like it. I think it's kind of gate between a field, so it does really nothing and has very dirty syntax, in my opinion. Very useful thing is that all errors are really handled and thrown from the one place, from the validation caller method. You get free type validation, despite the fact Ruby is weak typed, and some Java programmers looking at your documentation will ask a question. So, which data type you are expecting to get here? And you just say, dude, I don't really care because Ruby will transform it to the one I need, and that's weird. Here, Parametric allows you to get free type validation. And it's just Ruby. It's extendable. I did it with pleasure. I extended this gem into a new one, and I named it Paradox. So Paradox gem, sorry. It's a parametric and parametric gem extended with docs generation. This documentation is fully generated from Ruby code. Almost the whole documentation. Everything but descriptions. Everything we write in code is referenced here in the documentation. If a field becomes optional, we won't need to update the documentation after the changes. Just forget about maintaining it. By the way, even example payloads are generated. Here you can see that even if a field may raise an error, such as session secret, that I said before, should be found, should not expire, should not be closed, it should not be failed. The errors that may be raised are referenced here, and this is very useful. So if you face an API exception, a 400 code with a message that session not found, you know that the reason of this error is inside this field. So what does Paradox gem do? The first and main method it includes is structure. So each schema can be unfolded into a structure with metadata. Everything you apply to a field will be referenced here. Here's an example. Data session secret is the one you see in the documentation. And the hash, which contains metadata, says that it should be required, it should have type of string, and it has such a description, which is referenced to another object. I will not say about this here. And all the expected errors are referenced here. The gem takes care about safety of such manipulations and won't allow you to implement something wrong. And here, to have this metadata right, I have added validations. Yes, I added validations for the validation gem. In my project, I have built objects around schema objects, which references to HTTP request. And each HTTP request can be good or invalid. If data from request is good, we return a successful response. If incoming data is malformed or invalid, we return an error, an expected error. In good API, or an internal server error in a bad one. Despite the fact Paradox gem takes care about error handling, and it also allows you to write conditions right inside the schema definition, which are applied whenever something comes for validation. Depending on the condition, it invokes a subschema. Here, the logic for choosing a subschema is described inside mutation by method, which is linked to the error class key, which may come or not. We don't really know. And that's it. If it comes, gem will invoke schema for failed request. If it not, a successful request schema will be invoked, as written in block. Here, I prepared some code which says how it works. Here, for this class, I call validate method and pass here as argument an empty hash. It is empty, that's why we get errors object with field that certificate is required. For the next example, validate method receives a hash with error class inside, and failed request subschema is invoked and says that, okay, I expect field error message, it should be present, but you didn't send me it. That's why error message is required. Text is inside errors object. And that's it. After that, we pass all the necessary parameters that is expected to work with failed request subschema. We pass error class and error message, and here we see that errors are empty and output contains the data we send to the validation. Take a look here that despite the fact that field certificate should be present in the original schema, it is overwritten in the failed request schema, and now it's declared. So schema can override definitions. And now for this scenario, certificate field is not required anymore. For this scenario, we pass certificate with a hash inside, and the mutation by block decides that, okay, error class is not given. That's why we go with successful request subschema. And this fails because we should pass such fields as eligible, mode, and so on. So what do we have so far? And what I'm gonna do in the next releases. In my main project, I have implemented example payload generation based on the schema. Some useful tools for fields descriptions management. As you could see that in the documentation, descriptions were present and they didn't appear from nowhere. Some useful tools that check whether example payload matches related schema. Also, check whether all the fields have descriptions. This is also very useful for production environment. Also, I have implemented schemas linking for better documentation experience. So you don't need to build a kind of explanations how to use your documentation. You just can say that you should start here, and after that will be a link to the next request and to the next request to the previous one and so on. So it's also very useful. Another very useful thing that I started to develop is Swagger compatibility. There is no problem to write output into a Swagger file and just read it and don't care about styles, documentation building, and so on. And I'm working on building a powerful community for this gem. Here you can see the progress of each of these plans. Paradox is just extended parametric gem. It's built for having a great documentation tool, better than Swagger. Just because Swagger you have to write by your own, but for Paradox you write Ruby code that performs validations, and after that you get just documentation for nothing. It allows you to validate your data, to check whether a field is present, whether a value for this field is present, whether it should be optional, may come or not. It allows you to check whether this value is a string, is an array, integer, and so on. And even it is possible, you can coerce this string to an integer if it coercible. It allows you to define dry and reusable policies and use them everywhere you want. And even more, you can use the same validation classes for active record classes to validate your models. But I think this is a kind of useless because you have performed all the validations in the controller. It will allow you to keep your controller and your specs clean because you delegate all the validation logic, which takes the most of lines of code in a controller to the gem. It will allow you to raise all the API errors in one place. It will help you to get easy error handling system with beautiful error messages, and you don't care about how they are created. They're just structurized. It is extendable. So if something you need is not inside the gem, you can write your code and make a pull request on the GitHub repo and extend it. So I guess this will give a pleasure to you. Also, you will have human readable schema output. In the future, you will also get documentation descriptions and example payload generation tools. And the most powerful thing that you will forget about maintaining documentation, because every change in a scheme will be reflected in your docs. This gem is quite simple, trust me, intuitive and easy to use. And it is stable and used in production in my project. Okay, that's all.
Maxim, thank you very much. I think now we can proceed to the questions and answers session and see whether there are some questions. Can you look into that section?
Yeah, just a moment.
Okay, maybe I can address the question which is currently in the Q&A. Basically, Paradox seems to be really good and usable, but regarding parametrics, I still don't see any big difference with dry validation and dry schema. Could you please point me on them?
Yes, sure. Just a moment. I didn't turn up my video. Is it true?
Yeah, I have seen it in the beginning, but I thought that maybe that is your choice.
Sorry. Just a moment. Okay, regarding dry validation and dry schema, yes, they're very simple. They're the same almost. But dry validation and dry schema are built inside dry gem, so it has a lot of dependencies. And regarding this, I have tried to implement all my needs in the dry validation gem, and I have discovered that it's very hard to extend just because it has a lot of dependencies. And the approach of how dry validation is written is a little bit dirty on my view. So parametric is a lightweight. It has around 5 files and more specs. And if you have something to add, you will find the place where to build your code in 5 minutes. In dry validation, you will spend some days for it, I guess, on my view. And dry schema and dry validations are good enough for validations. They are awesome. I have used it. But for extending purposes, I went with parametric.
Thank you very much. I would like to remind our attendees that in case they have questions, they should address them in the Q&A section. Feel free to do that. I have another question. So suppose there are people who are interested in Paradox and they want to contribute. What will be the procedure? How can they do that?
That's quite simple, I guess. You can open an issue in the GitHub repository and even create a pull request if you have already wrote your code. That's all, I guess. Sincerely, I haven't been an open source developer before. So if you have some ideas how to help me with that, I'm in.
Yes, all the attendees could come up with new ideas and share their thoughts and maybe also contribute themselves. There are some more questions. The next question is, how many production projects do you know who use it, if any?
Yep. Hello, Andrei. Currently, I use this gem into one big project, which has around of 100 lines of code, one of 100,000 lines of code, sorry. And it is in production. It is used by a lot of clients. It's about core banking system, PSD2 compliance, and So I would say this is really in production. So I trust this gem. I know how it works, and I don't care about some misconsistencies that may occur in this gem. And this is main project in which this gem is used. And on the other hand, in some small projects, some parts of this gem are also used. So this gem is not about only validation. It allows you to have structure-based validations and easy coercible schemas that are also useful to get rid of active record validations that are quite simple but tiny, and to have a more powerful validation tool. So I would say this gem is used in 2 projects, one big and one small. And on my own opinion, this gem should not be used for small project because it takes a lot of time to implement this. And if you have a project which just has 1 or 2 endpoints, just get and post, you'll spend more time to implement this logic. But if your project has around 20 endpoints and you have to maintain the API, this gem will help you. So the answer for your question is 2 projects, and that's my project. I also know that there are around 30 likes on the Parametric gem, and I think that there are at least 30 projects that are also using this gem.
Okay, thank you very much. I hope that answers the question. We can maybe move on to the next questions. Do you have access? Can you see them?
Yep. Which one? The next one is...
I guess you can start from the most liked one.
Okay, got it. Andrea. Currently not, but the first adapter...
Sorry to interrupt, Maxim. Can you read the question?
Yeah, sure, sorry. The question is, does Paradox support documentation adapters? For example, generate docs for API or Postman? If not, is it extensible enough to build on top of it? Okay, currently not, just because I have not enough time to build it. But currently I'm working on extension for Swagger, and it's quite simple. I don't see any problems to implement this. So extensibility is the main feature of this gem. About Postman, I haven't thought about it yet, but in my project, I have thought about a feature that allows you to make requests right from the documentation. And it is a kind of Postman, I would say. And of course, it will allow you to export all the necessary data to perform a request. And such as example of payload, such as necessary fields that should be filled from the global variable and so on. So in my head, it's everything already created, but I just need more hands to implement this. So this gem is very extensible. I could not fit into the one presentation all the feature it has, but Postman and Swagger compatibility are the next steps, I would say.
Okay, it looks like there is another question. What specific extension features did you need Parametric for? I could understand it wrong, but as far as I understand it,
Parametric gem is only about validation. It doesn't care about everything that it's built in Paradox. So it just allows you to create schemas, fields, policies, and so on. Reference to the errors that may occur during validation are added in the Paradox. Documentation generation is added in Paradox. Documentation, the payloads generation is also added in Paradox. So let's say in other words that Parametric, it's dry validation and dry schema, that's all. Paradox and is a gem that uses this logic to build documentation, and it's focused on it. That's it.
Okay, there is another question. Maybe you can read it out loud.
Yeah, Orban, hello. Orban asked that in the negative case, when a validation fails, what are the benchmark results against active model validations and dry schema validations? Because dry schema is 100x faster compared to the active model validations for the failure scenarios. Did you make such a benchmarking? Actually, no, I didn't, because I have monitoring tools that says me if a request takes much time or much more time than it expected to take. And I haven't faced any requests that took much time. That's why I didn't even thought about that. We are working on application level, and if a Ruby code takes 50 milliseconds, but C code takes 1 millisecond, we don't really care, because we are focused on code readability and extendability. So if a request will take much more time than I expect, of course, I will do benchmark, and I will be ready to answer your question. And I even add this information into the GitHub documentation, of course. Currently, I say that I didn't make any benchmarks because I didn't see an issue about it.
Okay. Yeah, if there are no more questions, then Maxim, thank you very much. I hope that everyone got the most out of this presentation. And I think now we can move on to the next session. So thank you very much, Maxim. And yeah, see you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.